Thanks for tuning in to another talk here at the Product Led Festival. Hope you're enjoying the event so far because we've got even more juicy knowledge and insights from product-led pioneers heading your way. Remember to have your questions ready and get the tailored answers you need from the experts themselves. Sit back and enjoy. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Product Led Festival. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Brian Dreher, who is the Head of Product Marketing from Quervay. We're really proud to be partners with Quervay for this event, and I'm really excited to hear Brian talk about turning customers into champions with embedded analytics. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brian to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate the introduction here. Welcome everybody to the talk today. My name's Brian Dreher. I am the Head of Product Marketing at Quervay. I've spent my career in both product marketing and product management. So these are topics near and dear to my heart. So why don't we get started? Turning customers into champions, right? So what we're really gonna look at today is how we turn and use embedded analytics and how that leads to product success. So to start things off, whether you acknowledge it or not, every product is an analytics product. If your end users upload or create information in your system, I promise you, you are an analytics product. So what's going to differentiate you from your competition is how you address this. And your job as a product manager is to empower your end users with their own data. You are only as successful as a product manager when your end users are successful, and they are not going to be successful without that information and that data that they provide. So right now, many of you are saying to yourself, but I've got charts. And you're right. Some basic data visualization is a natural place to start. But I promise you, it's just the start. Because what your customers are really saying is, what do I do with that data? And they're asking you as product owners and as product leaders and as product visionaries, what do you do with your data? And that is where you come in and create some real differentiation. So why don't we level set a little bit here? Right, so a common definition of embedded analytics, right? It's usually third party, it's business intelligence style software that you can embed or OEM or integrate directly into your product. It typically goes beyond just a static charting library that you can kind of get off the shelf. This is really helping your end users discover those insights, build the custom reports, and really take your analytics features to the next level. So how does this fit into the PM toolbox? Right? Because analytics, features, and solutions kind of go in a few different directions for product managers, right? So for one, you've got your traditional business intelligence. That's always really been for internal users. I know this is the kind of the group that's trying to pivot and sell you this, but the reality of it is these solutions have always been kind of built for internal usage, people to do their own data discovery on their own. Then you've got that next class, like product usage analytics, really also for product owners, right? So this is analytics software that's for you, telling you about your product, kind of like the Pendos of the world. And then really this embedded analytics, these are for product users. So this is a class of product that is meant for your end users, right? And that's how you have to think about it. How does this affect your end user? How does it benefit them? How do they use it for success? So the three common, ideas of like, why would you offer an advanced analytics in your product, right? The one is, the first one's kind of the obvious one. You want to create some differentiation. How do you make your product different from your competitors, right? Because let's be honest, a bar chart is a bar chart is a bar chart. That's not different, but there are ways of offering more. The second one, increasing customer satisfaction. This is obviously where you want to get to. Increased customer satisfaction really is about keeping those customers around for longer, increasing your retention rates, decreasing churn, whichever one you track. I promise you, you're probably tracking one of them. And as retention becomes more and more important to the success of a SaaS application, you really always have to be looking for ways to increase this metric. And the last one, it tends to go hand in hand with the first two, but a lot of times there are ways of creating some standalone revenue streams. There are ways of monetizing this. And I'll give you some easy ways to monetize this as well as we go along. So when we talk about differentiation, why is it so important? Right? So I found this Gartner metric that's actually talking about how 80% of enterprise application vendors actually compete on the sophistication of their analytics. That's a large number. And even if you're not selling to the largest of the enterprise, I promise you, if you have any kind of dashboarding or reporting in your product, your sales engineers probably cover that in your demo. So how is you as a product owner using that part of your application to create that differentiation? And where it all starts, right, is know your users, right? We all have probably done personas, whether you've done it formally or informally. You also have to understand who you're writing to, right? So the traditional BI creators are moving to or kind of catering to the IT department, right? So they're looking for the technical staff that understand how to, do database connections or some kind of manual imports into a staging database or a reporting database. And then they're just kind of, supporting the line of business analysts. You have different users, and these are your users. And this is where, you really kind of need to understand who you're selling this to, right? So you have those product managers. So that's you, right? There's obviously a component of this. You've got to design the system. You're influencing features and products and what you're going in. But then you have at least 2 levels of customer users, right? That is very unique to a SaaS application, that multi-tenant application, because you've got a customer admin, which I'll use as kind of a generic term for the person who bought your system, and they know what your company needs. But then they also have end users that they're supporting. And you're going to find that there are end users that want to create reports. So if you think about it, right, those static kind of reports, right? So this is what everybody offers. There's really nothing differentiated about your out-of-the-box canned reports. Like, there just isn't. Your opportunity is catering to these next 2 users, right? So catering to the person who owns the account, who wants to create something specific for their company, but then they have people on their side that are also capable of creating their own visual analysis. How do you support them? And that's the user that you as a product manager are never going to touch directly, right? You're going to maybe deal with the customer admins. You're probably never going to deal with their end users all that much. So now you're looking for a solution that is easy to implement, easy to onboard people, and then they can get going on their own. You're always going to have kind of that 80-20 rule with analytics, right? 80% are going to be viewers, maybe 20%, maybe even 10% are going to be actual creators. But the creators have probably the most influence as to whether or not they will retain and continue with your product. So if you think about what do they want, right? Obviously, they want to be able to edit what you've built. So how do you give them something to start with? Because nobody really likes a blank slate. People typically want some place to start, right? So how can they actually take that, whether it's a gallery, whether it's a template, whether they're just out of the box, and how can they make changes and create a starting point from that? Then you're going to have the concept of, well, I probably want to create something also for my users because, well, I look at data my way because it's my business. And you're going to deal with that. And I guarantee many of you have had to deal with that concept of, every customer wants something a little bit different, right? So how do you empower them? And they want to create those templates. Obviously, they have to be able to share it, right? These can't live in a silo. This has always been, a challenge of some of the legacy BI vendors is that they live in these line of businesses and sharing was never their strong suit. But you as a SaaS owner have to make this a natural part of your strong suit. And then you are going to have a very, complicated or at least a strict set of permissions that they want to customize. This goes all the way down on the security aspects to how you protect multi-tenant data. But also goes into how they give permissions within their organization so that only the right users on their side are able to actually create and edit. So you really do need to keep all of these points in mind. So turning data into action, if you think about traditional business intelligence, it was kind of data and it to charts, and that's typically where it started and it stopped. So in a SaaS world, right? And I move from charts to visual analysis because you have a unique opportunity actually as a SaaS application. You can actually add more information and augment that with additional data and insights. So you can actually help customers understand what they're looking at. So they don't always necessarily have to just find the trends themselves. You can help them find the trends. Your application can surface more insights. And it doesn't have to be a very complicated machine learning driven analysis at the get-go, but you certainly have the opportunity to grow into that. So it's a little bit more. And then the third step is how do you take action? That is typically the next step. That is what you as product managers really need to be thinking about. So these are kind of the first steps of creating that differentiation, giving customers what they want. The third leg of the pillar is obviously, right? Well, I'm going to spend all this money and I'm going to invest in this. How do I generate a return, right? So how do you show me the money? And there's 3 pretty straightforward ways that you can do this. The first, obviously, is product add-ons. It's a very simple thing to add a line item. If you have a product suite where you are used to adding line items, you probably more likely find this with some of the larger enterprise applications, enterprise deals. But to say that you've got an advanced analytics add-on is a pretty straightforward way to do it. If you're a user-based system, a lot of times those premium user licenses, this is a really good feature to tack on to premium licenses to get people to tick up from those basic licenses to a more either advanced license, a premium license. Because to be honest, it's one of those things where people are going to look at it and be like, oh, I need that. Great. We need you on this license. Makes a lot of sense. The last one, which most people don't think about going to directly, but if you already have a professional services organization, you can actually add an analytics component to that. Pretty simple. A lot of times, it still works and kind of, you still have this idea of multi-tenant data. That doesn't change, even though you have a professional services group that's actually creating dashboards and reports on behalf of customers. And let's be honest, professional services in the US at least, is typically $200 to almost $300 an hour if you did it time and materials. But a lot of times I've seen customers of ours actually create flat rates, for a certain number amount, they'll create the dashboard for you, and it kind of just assumes that the hours are rolled into it. So it's something to think about. There are three clear ways that you can monetize this. This does not have to be just an expense, especially as many of you SaaS operators are looking at margins. So think about how you can monetize this. It doesn't just have to be kind of a time suck. So that's kind of the first half of this. And then, as we kind of look through, well, what's changing in the industry, right? Why is now the time that I should be thinking about it? And the industry is changing again. There are some trends that are real driving some things around, especially in the analytics world. And really what we look at is what are the powers that are, driving this change, driving you to rethink how you implement this. And really it's kind of the rise of the cloud, which obviously, just continues to grow by leaps and bounds. But this whole idea that you can do more with data augmentation, this is becoming far more accessible than it was even just 5 years ago. And then really that last step, what does data activation actually mean? And why is that easier now than it was, kind of years ago? So if we think about the cloud aspect first, some of this is going to feel pretty intuitive, I'll fully admit here. But who doesn't like big numbers? So cloud spending obviously is going gangbusters. If you've started a SaaS company in the last 5 years, the idea that you would do this as an on-premise and a colo facility probably wasn't even on your plate, right? I mean, why would it be? Unless you just have some really technical need, there's really no reason for that. So spending just continues to grow. AWS obviously is crushing it in the SaaS world, but Azure and GCP are doing their thing too. The third stat is the one that I liked, which I think is kind of telling of trends, is like, when those large enterprises really come around to adopting that. So, this is another Gartner stat, right? If 85% get there, kind of in the next 4 years, I mean, right, that whole idea of cloud first, I mean, that's not a trend anymore. That's just the way business works. So you can see that we're really moving up there. And, these are kind of interesting numbers. You can break down cloud spending a lot of ways, but that orange box is highlighting just how big SaaS is in this market. So, if you're a SaaS company, if you're selling to other SaaS companies, if you do anything on the cloud side of SaaS, I mean, the spending just continues to go up. And really, why that matters, right, is the cost of running analytics databases and analytic services really continues to drop. So to kind of bring that back to what we're talking about here is that, it used to be very expensive to create that data warehouse, that analytics database that you kind of generate the reports on, because querying data is a very compute intensive operation. So when the costs come down, that means your opportunities continue to expand, which is why I think that's important. And it's obviously no secret, right, that SaaS companies continue to rise. So this is, crunch-based data basically since the turn of the century. And obviously the last decade, has seen a huge rise in SaaS. And I don't think that's any secret, especially that it ties into the rise of cloud, right? I mean, the barriers to entry of starting a company are just far lower than they ever used to be, which is a pretty important thing there. So how does that benefit you? Is that now all of a sudden you're getting access to purpose-built solutions for SaaS apps, right? So now all of a sudden, it used to be that everyone built their own cloud, you had your own application, or maybe it was a server-based application because it had to be deployed on premise. Well, now with the rise of SaaS and the rise of SaaS on the clouds, you're starting to see other solutions out there. So architecture is taking on a bit of a new meaning, right? They say they play with AWS, with Azure, with GCP, but now you're thinking about, am I moving data out of my environment? Can I keep the data in there? You have some new possibilities that you probably didn't have, just 3 to 5 years ago. So things really are changing. The BI industry is one that has struggled, which is why, on the embedded analytics side, you're seeing kind of this rise of a new class of vendors, which is, it's no secret, this is where we play too. A lot of those BI companies really were founded last decade, and they were always focused on internal analytics, and they were founded before the rise of SaaS, plain and simple. So, and I'm painting a very broad stroke here, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in the audience who are like, well, we made this work using X, Y, and Z. But the point is, you probably had to make it work. It probably didn't just work. So you definitely see this. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but the bottom line is, they just weren't founded for the use case that you need today. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you kind of overlay these charts as to you see this kind of just macro trend in this bucket. It's kind of an interesting one. So one of the biggest things about cloud, right, is this idea of serverless, right? I bet many of you have either adopted some cloud principles within your architecture, you're kicking the tires on it. It's this whole idea of what does cloud native actually mean is really starting to change again. Serverless is great. Serverless offers this, the scalable component in architecture that you can deploy, but it also brings the cost way down. It's really quite fascinating how serverless has really changed the costing game. And a lot of times it does make your developers more productive because they can really just focus on the code aspect of it, not so much the scaling aspect of it. And kind of the way we like to position this is if you think about how trends have changed, right? On-prem servers were always just this sunk cost that was buried in IT departments, right? You never really thought about it as product owners. As you move to cloud servers, well, there's a bit of a variable cost to that. It's kind of a stepped fixed cost in that, you have to grow it as you grow, but there's some variability to it because it grows with your customers, right? But you're still sitting around with servers that are idle maybe 14 hours a day, right? You still have to pay for that. Serverless and on-demand costing is really where you as product owners, product leaders, working with your engineering managers, this is where you really start to change the game on those infrastructure costs, is really where that comes. And when you kind of adopt this serverless first principle, and you start to look at not just the cost, the productivity gains, it's pretty cool what happens. And you start to see this complete mind shift. And there will be people in there that may have been doubters, but I promise you will be changing their mind. And you'll get them on board pretty fast, especially at the leadership level. So that's kind of the trend that's been really shifting things on the cloud level. On the AI side, right, not a big secret here. You see a lot of everything is powered by AI. Personally, I think this is an overused phrase because it's kind of overselling things, but the accessibility to it, has really changed. So if you think about, traditional business intelligence, it's always been looking at historical data, right? Because it's always backward looking. Then this field of data science, which is where the AI and ML comes into play, is typically forward looking, right? Because you're trying to use data to project out what's going to happen in the future. This is the gap you as product managers are trying to fill, right? How do you actually bridge this gap so that you can turn historical data into future predictions so that you can recommend the next best action? So let's start with this again, right? Traditional BI, it's data, it's charts. Good luck, Mr. Customer. Figure it out for yourself. Well, now we're really giving rise to this augmented analytics, this whole idea that you can use machine learning to detect insights automatically. And I don't think that the dashboard is dead personally. I think there's always going to be a visualization component to it. There's always a very clean, accessible way of looking at aggregated data in a visual format, right? But this idea of augmentation opens up a new lane. So you go from the data, you have a data preparation side of it, and that augmentation can really feed really that automation side. So yes, you're looking at data. It can add some additional insights that the user didn't have to try to find themselves, but it can also lend itself to an automation track. And the automation track really is where your data starts to go into action automatically and dynamically. And then it creates this cycle of loop where it starts to learn from itself. And that's really kind of, the next breed of what it means to be a modern analytics system, is how do you actually create this constant cycle of data, insights, action, and back to data, and how do you learn from those actions? That's kind of the big one, which dovetails nicely into the next, into kind of the last one is really automation. Really, this is the glue that ties this together. One of the things that really has changed is the amount of data and the types of data that are capable of being analyzed, right? So again, you go back even just 5 years, everything was very structured. It always required that structured format. But that really isn't always the case. I mean, NoSQL databases are certainly on the rise, and they're certainly on the rise as the backend database for SaaS applications. I mean, tools like Mongo do very well selling into SaaS applications, and those are not structured, right? Or they're not structured in a traditional way, but they are very much in play for being the data backend to analyze this. So you've got structured and unstructured, doing a lot more with form data, that kind of, it's kind of unstructured, but it comes in from humans directly. So how do you analyze that? You see that a lot in certain industries like financial and insurance industries. Those are very important to some of those. The ideas of text with speech, right? So now all of a sudden, right, all this rise of speech analytics, right? That's a whole new thing, right? I mean, Nuance has been doing this for years, but you got, AWS and their Comprehend service, which has really taken it up a level. Azure and GCP also have their own. So all of a sudden, it's like now you have a whole new, another layer of analytics. Same with kind of media, images, and videos, right? Those are things that are, really coming on in the last few years as being something that are no longer this advanced thing, but like speech analytics is starting to become low-hanging fruit. Like that should be something that it's almost a no-brainer if you have any kind of customer interaction to analyze in your solution. And then it's always about what do you do with it, right? Again, not stopping with the dashboards in the middle, but continuing it. There's always going to be some concept of alerting, which is a great place of using Twilio and Slack, right? I mean, how many systems can push notifications into Slack channels? But you have to be able to push data either into other systems or back into your system. So that's the whole idea that you're creating new data based on past, you're pushing it to another system via webhooks or something like that. And those are the kinds of things you're looking for of like, okay, I have data, I have this concept in the middle that's either going to augment it with additional insights, it's going to, work on triggers, it's going to work on real-time thresholds, and then it's, okay, I need another component of like, well, how do I do something with it? And that's really the automation that has really started to take a hold. And kind of winding down here, just putting a quick example on that. If you look at the top row, green boxes are all what a human would normally have done before an automated process. If you think about the bottom row, the gray ones become automated, the greens are the humans. Some people say that automation is going to automatically kill all these jobs. And I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of that, but I don't think it's quite as drastic as some would say, because a lot of times what's going to shift is people aren't going to do the mundane tasks anymore. They're going to do the really important tasks. And that's what this is meant to highlight. The person doesn't go away. The person gets to do more meaningful work. And that's one of the big tangible benefits of automation. If you can offer automation in your application, you have a very tangible ROI. I mean, if you save somebody, one person, 2 hours a week, multiply that out by the year, multiply that out by a number of users, you can put a hard and fast ROI on your website, in your value prop, in your marketing material that says our system saves you money. And that is something very simple to latch onto. So bringing this back to how do you create champions? How do you create that differentiation? When you can save people money, that is, one of the easiest ways to get a point across. And that's a very hard thing to do when you have to be like, well, we have this workaround, or well, you can kind of get to it, or we have this wide open thing that you can sort of put together. Like that doesn't quite get there. Custom isn't the way to do it. If you can offer a more thorough and a more robust process to save people time and money, those people will become your champions. Like you will make those people customers for life. So just to kind of wrap up here, the thing I always like to say is analytics is how your customers justify their investment in your product, right? So if you've ever thought this was an afterthought, when one of your customers has to go to their boss and say, did this work for us? The first thing they're going to do is they're going to go to your reporting feature and they're going to look for some metrics that looks at how successful they were. That is how they're going to justify this. If they can't justify the investment in your product, they are not going to renew. And you will have a retention problem. So I've said this before, analytics is how your customers justify their investment in your product. Because if you do this and you do this well, this is the kind of feedback you're going to get. I promise you there. So that wraps up this presentation. I want to thank everybody for sitting through this. Curve, in case you haven't figured out by now, we're an embedded analytics service for application providers, obviously here. So I believe we're going to open this up for questions at this point, if we've got any.
Thanks so much, Brian. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Yes, we've got a few questions in the chat and we do have a few minutes to answer them. So if there's any more, please do drop them in and we'll get to them ASAP, everyone. So we've got one here from Tom. What recommendations do you have about how to get started embedding analytics into products or applications?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest ways of kind of getting started, right? You know, people do an evaluation because they know they need the visualization aspect of it. So you're constantly looking at, okay, can I do dashboards? Yes. Do I have dashboard builders? Yes. Right. Those are kind of your, we'll call them the gateways. Right. Those are kind of your table stakes. And then it's like, okay, I want to do a little bit more. Maybe I want to customize dashboards. So it's not pre-built. I want widgets. Then it's okay. Then you have a data management side. So, you kind of start with the basics of what you know. You need better visuals. You don't want to build it yourself. And then you kind of, grow from there.
Nice. We've got another here from Raul. What kind of maintenance is required for embedded analytics solutions?
Some of that's probably going to be a bit vendor specific. I think this is where you're looking at vendors that are really more of, cloud native is kind of taking an interesting thing. Like if you're a serverless solution on AWS, you're probably moving into this class of what we call like AWS native, which is, using AWS services to create a solution. That actually lowers your maintenance quite a bit because you want something that's obviously easy to update, easy to deploy. Everyone's bringing some kind of proprietary code. But serverless also gives you some of those benefits like zero downtime, which is, you've had with containerized solutions before, but as you move from like containers and serverless to microservices, you reduce that downtime, the kind of maintenance starts to come down because it's also, you don't have to take down your system, which is also a pretty important thing. So some of that depends on the vendors, but I'd be looking for those that really leverage the cloud services to their advantage.
Nice. One here from Jemima. Are there limits to embedding analytics into existing applications?
I mean, there really shouldn't be. I can tell you that systems come with some different back-end architectures. Sometimes it depends. One of the biggest things that we see is how people have either commingled data or purposely not commingled data. Because typically, you're dealing how you deal with multi-tenancy. There's a couple schools of thought there. So I think one of the things you're kind of first looking at is one, where does your data live? But as far as limitations go, this is where you've really got to think about what you need today and what you need maybe in a year or two. Because you will find some of the vendors that they will give you a pretty looking dashboard today. But that building experience is where they start to separate very fast. So you might think you don't need it today, but if you ever want to offer it, you should probably be evaluating that. Because I don't think it's a limit per se of a class of solutions. There's going to be limits in the vendor you choose. So the one you choose, you want to have an investment on. I mean, you're going to integrate this into your product. You're going to put development resources. You're going to put your roadmap on it. It better grow with you, right? So I think you got to look at the limits of the vendors side by side, not just on a dashboard basis, but on a solution basis as it goes forward. Hopefully that answers that one.
Awesome.
Okay.
Another from Ben. How does an embedded analytics platform's architecture need to jive with the architecture of the parent application?
I don't think they don't necessarily have to jive one for one. I know for sure that if you're traditionally a server-based application, you are hopefully moving away from that. This is where the cloud native concept takes on a few different meanings. But I think if you've adopted serverless, for sure, you are going to be thinking that any integration or any OEM solution you want should also be serverless. If you've bought into the benefits of it, like, why would you go back and buy a server? And because you'll spend more on one server than you will on almost your whole software architecture. So I think there's, as you move forward as a SaaS application, you want to know that your partners and your OEM solutions move forward with you. I mean, I think that's probably important number one, right? So if you've adopted cloud, how have your vendors adopted cloud too? And there's variance in there.
Great, and we've got one final question here from Rahul. Yep. Who is the primary persona for embedded analytics solutions?
Yeah, so there's kind of three there, right? The first one starts with you as product managers because you build the first one. You kind of build the starting point. On the customer side, there's usually at least one, potentially two, and I kind of highlight this on one of the earlier slides. So you've got the power user who bought your solution, and then they've got to empower some people on their side. And it typically follows the 80-20. I mean, 80% of the people are just going to be data consumers, and you've got about 20% that are going to be data creators. So the creators is really that persona that you're also driving towards. So, and that's the person that buys your solution. They're going to be thinking about that power user in mind.
Awesome. And with that, it's
right.
Yeah, no more questions. Look like it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today. Really informative presentation. Everyone, thank you for joining. If you'd like to find out more about Curve, please do check out their site. It's pinned to the top of the chat, and do reach out to Brian on LinkedIn as well. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have. So with that, thank you so much, Brian, and everyone for joining.
Thank you, guys. Have a great one.
Bye-bye.